Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to BIC Life Podcast, the podcast where we talk about life and faith from a brethren in Christ perspective. We're so glad you could join us today. My name is Ryan Stockton, and I am here, as usual, with Scott.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, everybody. So we're really glad you could join us here. We are actually in episode 3 of what we're hoping to be a 4-part series, taking a look at the topic of women in ministry, specifically women in ministry leadership. And if you've been with us for a little bit, you've listened to the last couple of episodes, which we encourage you to do. We kind of took a deep dive into some of the theology, the apologetics or the defense of women in ministry, why the brethren in Christ takes the egalitarian stance that any position that is open to a man in the church is also open to a woman. We took a look at some of Scott's research and talked about some of that in the first episode. We had a great interview with Dr. Timothy Fisher last episode. We're so thankful to him for his time. And today we're really excited because we have another guest with us today, someone who can really speak a lot better into this topic than Scott or I would. And if you've been listening to this series, you're probably thinking, well, it's about time we get a woman's perspective. Ericka, why don't you introduce yourself? Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name's Ericka Henry. I'm a 2-time church planter and lead pastor. I'm currently in Allentown, Pennsylvania, planting Holy District, which is a really unconventional, fun, hyper-local expression of the church in Pennsylvania. Love being a part of the BIC family. And my husband and I moved from Arizona to Allentown in May of 2019 in order to begin this work. And it's been a wild ride. My husband's name is Blake. We will have been married for 11 years this month on the 22nd. We have a newly two-year-old son named Alexi, who is so much fun. People talk about the terrible twos, but so far they're actually just really fun. I don't know. Is that bad luck or something to say that?
Oh, no. It's great. Sometimes the terrible twos are the terrific twos, and then it turns into the terrible threes. So you never know.
A lot of therapy when we hit 3.
Therapy threes, yeah.
So yeah, we have a little dog named Spock, who is a Boston Terrier French Bulldog mix, who we love, and we live in West Park Historic District of Allentown. It's our neighborhood. We love it. So that's a little bit about me, and I think you guys are going to be learning a lot more about me and my broader story as we jump into this episode today.
I have to ask, you just said your dog's name is Spock. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So are you guys fans of Star Trek or what?
We're not Trekkies in any sense that would make a Trekkie happy. What you just did was correct. The reason why our dog's name is Spock is because he's a French Bulldog Boston, so his ears stick straight up.
Okay.
And when we first brought him home, he always had this very stoic look on his face. He didn't show any kind of expression. He was just very, I don't know, just there.
That's awesome.
I just thought, let's just pay homage to Spock. We've got this 20-year stoic little friend now in our family, but here,
I love it.
For the nerds and all of us, we also had a big dog named Sam, and shortly after we named him Spock, a couple months later, it hit me I had an opportunity to have a big-eyed little nervous dog named Frodo.
Right. Yes.
And a big, dependable, fuzzy dog named Sam. I really missed that nerdy opportunity to take that. So I'm sorry. I'm a disappointment on 2 levels right now.
It's okay.
Missed the Lord of the Rings opportunity.
That's fantastic. Ericka, there was one thing that I just want to touch on really quickly. When you were in your introduction, one thing you said was you are planting Holy District in Allentown. Now, I really like that language because so often with church planters, once you have your opening Sunday, your first Sunday, you have planted. And from there, you're just kind of growing what you have. We've started, it has been planted. Yay. Now, you've been going with Holy District for a little while now, and you are still planting. Tell me, how intentional was that word choice, and what kind of a difference in mentality does that mean for you?
Yeah, I don't know that I, really thought that through when I was saying it in this instance, but it certainly does represent our ethos. What do we see what it means to be the church here in the Holy District in Allentown, and also our desire to be a multiplying community of faith. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, even when we moved into the city, we didn't actually have like an opening Sunday until about 2 years after we had lived here. Um, all the way up until that point in time, we were connecting with neighbors, volunteering with local organizations. We didn't have anything that anyone within the church would remotely call like a worship service. And so we already were kind of weird. And people would ask us, "What are you doing here?" "Well, I'm planting a church." "Where is it?" "Well, nowhere." Wherever we are.
Yeah.
Um, so we were already in like a really unconventional space in our minds whenever we started. And then really, I would say our community was born last October when we had our first community meal. And I can share more about that later if it would be helpful. But some folks who have lived in the neighborhood for 30 plus years, we asked them for their help to put on a monthly community meal. They said yes. They invited the block. About 40 people showed up. They didn't let us bring any food. They didn't let us pay for the food. And those of us who were a part of the planting team by that point in time were like, okay, it's just time to pastor some folks and love some folks. And so we consider that our birthday,
Yeah.
the last Sunday in October of 2021. And so we had been here for a year and a half before that even happened.
Yeah.
And now we're just in this constant process of, God, what are you doing? Where are you going? Where are you inviting us? And how do we move with you? And who are you raising up to be sent into these new spaces? And so that ing ending does feel really important to us because God told me very early, as before we even started anything, in prayer, because I was really anxious about the fact that we hadn't started anything that was looking concrete yet. And I was just praying about it. And God said, the moment you start planning for permanency is the moment that this adventure ends. And it was
Ooh.
a very
Ooh.
humbling and shocking thing to
Yeah.
hear God say to me, because I was in this mode of, we got to build something so that it can last. And he's like, as soon as that becomes your focus has moved from the obedience to my spirit, and it's moved into this place of preservation, and that puts the end date on this thing. And so if you want to put an end date on this thing, then yeah, let's start planning to preserve it. But if you would like to keep going on this ride with me, then let's just be in it together minute by minute.
Man, established churches beware. Erica's bringing the fire today. Oh my.
That's what Jesus told me. I'm not saying he's saying that to you. I'm just saying that was a very clear word that
Yeah.
God gave me in a time of anxiety and grasping, and it really helped me.
Well, I think it's a good word for all churches, that we need to be really constantly evaluating where we live, the people who are there, our call to how we live out the gospel, and that will always be changing, because our culture is always changing, our context is always changing, and so the minute you have something figured out, like, great, but keep evaluating that, because it may not be the right thing in 5 years or in 3 years or whatever. So anyway, I like the ongoing mentality of that. That's really cool.
Do you guys have a website that people could check out for Holy District?
Yeah, it's just holydistrict.org. We're also on social media and like Facebook and Instagram. We're not super hip to the new stuff with, TikTok and all of that. Sorry, guys, it ain't me.
Yeah,
but our handle is at Rediscover Sacred. Rediscover Sacred is one way that we talk about our vision as a community. So yeah, you can totally find us that way.
Great. Awesome.
Well, that is not all of why we brought you on. We'd love to hear about the Holy District, but we'd love to hear about your experience. So in our first episode with Scott and I, he shared and I shared a little bit of where we started, and how it was kind of this journey to where we've landed this position of women in ministry leadership. Has been kind of a journey for us, a journey that we were privileged to not have to take for a number of years in our lives, being being guys. It was a journey that we weren't confronted with in our face day to day. So we shared a little bit of our story, but Ericka, why don't you tell us, some of the stuff that you feel is relevant from your story, and how you've gotten to be where you are today, and yeah, whatever you feel is relevant for us.
I'll go for the elevator pitch, and then you guys can, if you want to take me further down any of the subheadings, then we can certainly do that.
Yeah, we'll do
Sounds
some
good.
double clicking.
So, actually, Scott, really related a bit to your journey from starting in a more complementarian environment and then having this opportunity to really interrogate that from a more intellectual standpoint. But it did come to me sooner because I am a woman. And so it wasn't at seminary where I had that experience. It was really probably toward the end of my high school years. My family was unchurched until I was about 9 years old. And we began attending church on Father's Day during that time of my life, and really fell in love with Jesus, fell in love with the Bible, and had a really lovely, wonderful faith community that just welcomed us in and walked alongside us and did just really wonderful things for my family. And it happens that it was a complementarian, they had a complementarian theology. And the fact that we were not raised in the church meant that, my parents brought in some different perspectives. And I had been raised from the time I was small with the idea that women and men are equal. My mom, especially, my mom and dad both, but my mom from a female perspective, was very intent upon helping us to understand that our worth as women does not come from who we are married to. We are smart, we are capable, we can be whatever we set our minds to, that kind of an idea. And so we had a very egalitarian upraising. And then we started going to church, and then that kind of became a tension that more my mom was having to negotiate as a mother, as a woman who I think has a lot of leadership gifts as well. And I actually distinctly remember her having a conversation on the phone with our pastor, who was a dear man, a wonderful, godly man. And she said, so I can give birth to a boy, I can raise him to adulthood, but I cannot teach him a spiritual truth after he reaches a certain age. And I remember that, like, I was probably 10 or 11 or 12 whenever I was like getting a snack from the kitchen, and I heard her saying that on the phone, and it just stuck with me.
Yeah.
And in the midst of this, I was a part of a really wonderful youth group with lovely, awesome youth leaders, and they just recognized and named my leadership at every turn. But as you might imagine, that was very confusing for me, because on one hand, I'm having people in my life who love me and value me, who are saying, look at how much she loves the Bible, look at how she understands it, look at how she communicates it. I was starting Bible studies in grade school on the playground. This is who God made me. It wasn't ever something that I was trying to be. It was someone I already was.
Yeah.
And I had these people in my life who were like, look at her leadership. And then whenever I would start to investigate, like, well, what would that mean for me in the future? All of a sudden it got like really murky and weird and awkward, because everything narrowed. And depending on who I was talking to, it meant nothing was there for me in the church for the future, or children's ministry, or, maybe for some people, students ministry. I can't sing, so there's no way they were going to put a microphone in my hand for that purpose. Like it was just felt really complicated.
Yeah.
And I learned from a very young age, a coping mechanism that I developed was, I'm just not going to want the thing that they're going to tell me I can't have. So although
How'd that go?
something that God really has been so gracious to walk with me through, because it very much, I came to this point where I discerned a call to ministry when I was 13, 14 years old. And I thought to myself, well, I'm probably not going to be able to be like a pastor. So maybe I could be like I don't know. And I just started to try to imagine what that would look like, because it did seem that I was supposed to be in some kind of a teaching and leadership kind of a space, but I couldn't imagine what that would be like. And I had people actively telling me that that wasn't a possibility. And so there came a time when I was mature enough in my faith that I had this moment when I thought, okay, there are some people who are saying this is okay. There are some people who are saying it's sinful. And what I need to know is actually, what does God have to say? Because I see the reasons why they say what they do in the, from the scripture, and how these people are interpreting it and how these people are interpreting it. And I feel deep in my soul that God has given me these gifts, and that this is what's going to bring me the most amount of contentment and joy and life that is truly life. But if God really is telling me no, then I don't want to do something that God is telling me I shouldn't do. Like, I would rather feel like I'm missing out on something and be obedient to God than to do something that I think is something that I would like to do and be in contrary to God's desire and will for me. And so I went on this theological journey, really looking for a yes or no from God. Like, God, if you tell me no, I'll lay this down at the altar, and I'll do whatever you want me to do. But if you tell me yes, then it's the same thing. I'm going to say yes, and I'll do whatever you want me to do. And I don't care what anyone says or does after that.
It's some dangerous yeses.
Oh yeah. And so I got a dangerous yes from God. I mean, all the same things, Scott, that you discovered, when all the things that seemed apparent on the surface, that you start learning, like, well, that was an interesting translation. Why did they choose to make up a name that never existed whenever there's a female apostle whose name was Junia? And like and it did not take much scratching at the surface for me to discover, like, not only is this a yes, it's a big old definitely, of course, why in the world not? Yes.
Yeah.
And then that just kind of set me on the trajectory that I've been on my whole life, which is saying yes to a God who said yes to me while a lot of people around me are telling me no.
Yeah. Oh man. So Ericka, that, I feel like that's really, I feel like there's going to be someone who listens to this who's really going to resonate with that first part of your story here, Ericka. So thanks so much for sharing that. That's great. Now, this journey led you to a church in Arizona eventually, right? And at this church, you were on staff, on pastoral staff, with your husband. Was that how did that happen? First of all, like, were you married first and then both of you got hired by this church, or did you meet there at the church? Like, that's just interesting in and of itself, that both of you are on staff at this church.
Yeah. The Cliff Notes version, Ryan, is that around that time that I just had this kind of awakening and understanding, I got kicked out of church. Can't go into that, but maybe another episode if you want to.
We could make an episode on that. That could be good.
How to get kicked out of a church? I like the sound of that.
I can certainly lay it out for you. But my husband and I and some friends and family, we ended up planting a church in the wake of that. And so my husband and I were in ministry, bivocational. I was working full time. I was going to school, getting my undergrad degree, and we were planting this church in our hometown. And so even then we were ministering together. There would be people, once they found out that I was also a pastor planting this church alongside my husband and others, that would immediately stop speaking to me and then only speak to my husband. In those contexts, like, literally would not look at me in the face or in the eyes once they found that information. So that was like the first building blocks of my experience as a woman in ministry. During that time period, I graduated from my undergrad program and sensed God's yes to go to seminary. And so my husband and I were already married at this point in time. We moved to Arizona so I could attend seminary, and we didn't have any other stuff figured out. We just knew that this was the door God was opening for us, so we were stepping through. And there was an internship at this church that came across my undergrad's opportunities board. And so it had a stipend and it had an apartment. I'm like, well, wow, a place to live and a little bit of money coming in. Like, that's an answer to prayer. And so I ended up at this, very large church in the Phoenix metro area on staff as an intern. And while I was an intern there, they probably about 6 months in were preparing to offer me a job as a full-time pastoral staff in our discipleship ministries. And they met my husband, of course, as we were participating in the life of the church. And funny enough, they said, well, Ericka's great, so her husband must be great too. Is there a place where we can hire him? Now, I've never
Okay.
heard of a place like hiring a guy on staff and being like, this guy's great. His wife's probably awesome too. Can we pay her? Can we pay her to do the stuff that she might end up doing? But
Yep.
that's I'm not exaggerating at all. They literally said that to me word for word. We saw how great you were. We figured your husband would be a great guy as well. So, why not? And
Oh,
we both ended up on, which was, a blessing to our family in a lot of ways. But we both ended up on staff at this church. It was a very large church. There's like 70 people on staff. My work, for the most of my time there, I was overseeing ministry across 5 different campuses. Blake's work had him focused on a particular campus, first in student ministry and then as an associate campus pastor. So we weren't like doing ministry side by side together, as you might imagine, in kind of a typical church here on the like East Coast kind of area. We were both very much had our own sets of volunteers and pastoral teams and areas that it was specialized. It was a very specialized ministry environment.
Yeah.
So that's how that happened.
Okay. Well, that's cool. That's cool. So tell me a little bit about this church, and where did this church stand on the complementarian egalitarian spectrum of things?
Yeah. So
officially,
whenever I came in, I was doing my interviewing process. I knew enough by that point in time to ask some questions about this. What is your guys' stance? And their stance was egalitarian in the sense that, like God calls women, women are pastors here. And that was kind of the best answer that I got. But they also would say, like, but we have room to grow. We certainly have room to grow, and we need people like you to help us do that.
Okay.
So
yeah.
That's something we can come back to, because that does happen a lot.
Yeah.
And so, I came on staff. I noticed that there was only one person at the executive level of leadership who was not male. It was very much white male staff at the church in that time. And, that gave me pause. I was curious about that. And, the answer was always like, we would, but we just haven't found anyone that, is qualified or, has the competencies that we're looking for in this area. And so, I did the internship, and the more that I worked there, the more that I was seeing there was a certain level of, there were some areas where it seemed very apparent, like, we want women to really have opportunity here. But then there were kind of all these, what I would describe as like invisible barriers that I would bump into, or, I would experience. And there were no women on the governing board or the leadership council, or, whatever name that you would want to give that. So that was also an indicator. There was a ceiling, there were certainly ceilings that were not going to be broached or broken or that kind of a thing. And the pulpit really was reserved for our senior pastor, who is a man, and other men, unless it was Mother's Day, or there was women who were there were women guest speakers. But for the majority of the time that I worked there, and for the history of the church, which is over 60 years old now at this point, female pastors did not preach from the pulpit on the Sunday for the main message. Guest speakers or the pastor's wife on Mother's Day was kind of where that line was drawn. Women could sing, women could pray, women could lead, give a devotional, women could host, kind of like in a campus pastor role. But to deliver the message itself, that was a bit of a barrier. That was broken during my time there for a bit, but it was certainly a barrier there. That I think a lot of churches can relate to. There's a lot of spaces where we say, women can do this and this and this, but we start to get hives whenever we think about women actually delivering the sermon on a Sunday morning. And that was my experience there.
Yeah. You can have a woman guest teacher, but don't call it guest preaching.
Yeah. I'm wondering, do you have any sense as to why people would be kind of like, whoa, wait a minute, I don't know that we should allow a woman to preach, even though we on paper are egalitarian church? Like, what's the hesitancy there, from your experience, if you remember?
Yeah, I think it comes down to what you guys started this on is the theological framework. And so I think there were people in leadership that certainly were saying like, yeah, theologically, this is where I land and I personally affirm this. But when it comes to really significant stakeholders in our congregation, this is not where they land. And to, to have women on an elder board people would have a theological argument to say, well, in the scripture, it says that an elder should be someone who is the husband of one wife. So it should be, all elders should be men. And so there was a desire, and this was said explicitly, I'm not going to die on that hill. The leadership explicitly said, I'm not going to die on that hill. And there were times when I was actually told in leadership meetings or things like that, if you want to make women in ministry the issue, then that's going to cost you. And we're not about women in ministry. We're about Jesus and the gospel. And what was so painful for me is that I was simultaneously being told, we need to get better at this, and you are the way that we're going to do this. So you have to stay here, and you have to work, and you have to advocate, and you have to help us show people that women are gifted. But at the same time, don't do it too much, because this isn't a hill that we're going to die on. And as if it was being presented as a bifurcation, that it's either or. Either we're going to center on the gospel and Jesus and leading people to, salvation in Jesus, or we're going to care about women in ministry. And I don't think that's uncommon. I mean, I'm kind of saying things word for word here, from my experience. It's a very impossible position to be put in as a woman in ministry.
Yeah. Well, and that phrase, let's just focus on the gospel, has been used so many times in so many areas as a guise to just not deal with things that make us uncomfortable.
Well,
you talk about race conversations. That is, stop talking about race. We're just going to focus on the gospel, as if the gospel does not have social ramifications, as if it does not have ramifications on how we run a church or structure our organizations or whatever. That's a shame that we use that so frequently. Scott, sorry, what were you saying?
Yeah, no worries. I'm sorry. Ryan and I tend to jump on top of each other by accident. But anyway, I may edit that out. But anyway, I'm going to edit that out now. So
no way.
I regretted it as soon as I said it.
Oh, no way.
Anyway, okay, bring it back. So, I was getting the sense as you were sharing your story that the underlying issue was leadership was just afraid of losing people.
I think it's a fair assessment. And here's what I want to say from a place of like grace. And it's taken me some time to really process and heal and go to Jesus with hurt. Whenever you have a church and you are paying people's salaries and the giving that's coming in is sustaining the lives of families of people that you know and care about, it's not so simple as to say like, well, who cares? We'll blow this thing up. And as the burden of leadership in that style of structure for a church organization it's immense. And I just want to appreciate that. I want to name that and appreciate that. While saying, I still think that, yes, that is what it came down to, that people are used to and okay with women in these environments. But if we go too far this direction, they are not going to be okay with that anymore. And we know that in our kind of Christian evangelical church culture, as soon as you don't like one thing that's happening at your church, you can go to 15 other churches and kind of shop your way into a place that feels more comfortable for you. And so that was certainly, I think that felt at stake for our leadership in a lot of ways. And that created a really, really difficult environment for not just women, but I would also say people of color, people who are on the margins in any way, because there is this desire, I think, to change without changing. I mean, wouldn't it be great if our outcomes could change without anything else having to change? That is a lot of times what I have noticed that people are actually wanting when they're saying, well, you just stay, because we don't want to change, but we also need you to be here, because we know ultimately that the right thing would be that women and men would be able to both lead in these giftings, or that our congregation would represent our community in a way that, demographically is aligned. But the outcome that we're getting in our churches in any given moment is what our system and our structure is designed to create. And a lot of the times that it comes down to the rubber meeting the road of, so you say that you want this to happen. What are you willing to pay? What costs are you willing to pay in order to have this change actually be viable and a healthy change for the people that you say you want to be able to have a greater part in what God's doing in this community?
Yeah. And that, unfortunately, is a reality in all or most areas of churches, not just women in ministry, but it's, I loved what you said. You want to change, but you don't want to change, essentially, is what you said. I think we all as church leaders deal with that in some capacity or another. It's just with women in ministry, this is one where I would imagine it hurts a lot. Like, have you dealt with that, like the emotional side of things?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Lots of pain, lots of hurt, lots of tears, lots of rage, honestly, lots of just anger and rage. People who have really heard some of the nuts and bolts of my story will say to me, "Why are you still a pastor?" Like, if that would have happened to me, these are my male friends who are also pastors, and they say to me, if that would have happened to me, I would have been gone so long ago. And I say, what else can I do? God called me to do this. I don't have a choice. I don't want to do anything else. But it's it's very painful. It's painful to even receive compliment. People think they're giving me a compliment, and it's backhanded, because they're saying things like, oh, well, finally an actually, good lady preacher. And I'm like, oh,
what do you say to that? You're right.
Or I don't even necessarily want to go into all the random things that people have said to me, or like the fact that I would be standing outside with someone that I supervised, and people would come and speak to him about the ministry that I was overseeing, and then assume I was his wife, even if there was like 30 years of difference between us. And so you just are, for me, I'm constantly aware of all of the assumptions that people are making about me and the way that they're communicating with me. Or every time that I preach, afterwards, someone coming up to me and asking me if I've ever read the book of, First and Second Timothy.
Right.
Or and I'm like,
no, I haven't.
Please,
are those the two books before Third Timothy and Fourth Timothy?
And because they just, like, of course I wouldn't know, or else I wouldn't be preaching, or people getting up and leaving in the middle of a sermon that you're preaching. It's some things that, when we look at the common call of like just Christian charity toward one another, the freedom that people feel to really just disregard that when it comes to women in ministry is really, really painful. And then to be in an environment that's saying to you, we support this, and we're also not going to change things, systemically, because that's going to be too painful for us as an organization, but also don't leave because we need you to stay. It's actually, like I said earlier, it's an impossible situation for women to be in. But there are a lot of women who are in that exact situation right now.
I think it's one of those cases where people want your face, but not your voice. So you, like, on the staff page, you can see some diversity, diversity of opinions, but they don't want your voice at the table, because then that would mean we're going to have to, if we're going to mutually submit to each other in leadership, then that would mean we're going to have to submit sometimes to Ericka, to the women on our team. And that means letting go of some of the things that I might feel is best or direction that I want to go in favor of some wisdom from a sister, on the board or the leadership or whatever. And submission, that's that's a four-letter word. It's a
Yeah.
very long four-letter word for a
Yeah.
lot of people. And I know it's hard for anybody to submit, um, but yeah, I think in those cases you're talking about they want the face, but not the voice
And you're
at the
naming,
table.
tokenism, is one
Mm,
way to talk about that. And
sure.
I think it even goes a little bit beyond that because there were a lot of times when I actually did have a voice at the table. So
Mm,
I was the only woman in this particular team, or I was, and in that space, they could recognize my voice and even use my ideas and incorporate them into the sermon or whatever was going on without credit. So that's an interesting layer. Women do a lot of work without credit and without pay. Women bear a
mm,
huge burden of ministry and our communal life of faith together without titles, without pay, and without credit. And it's not that we're looking for it, but it's just whenever you scale out and pay attention, there is a different way that men tend to be treated when they're doing the same kinds of jobs.
mhm,
And then in addition to that, it's kind of interesting, right, that I could share theological ideas that then a man could say from the pulpit. But if it's coming out of my mouth from my body, from my female personhood,
yeah,
then now that's dangerous.
yeah.
And what I was able to process talking about the pain and the hurt, the way that I've been able to name this the best for myself is that I felt objectified. And
Mm,
I know that usually is a word that gets connected to like sexualization of people and
right.
that, but that's actually not what I'm talking about. What it
Mm,
felt like for me was as a woman, I wasn't I wasn't brought in as a whole person that had gifts and contributions and feelings and
yeah.
dreams and a journey that God was on with me. It was more like there are parts of me that are useful to this organization, and those will get used and
Mm,
used and used and used and used. And so, depending
mm,
on the context, if they're okay with my voice in this space, they'll use it and use it, use it and use it and use it. But I can't be me and fully me in this space. And or if they need a woman's perspective in a certain aspect, they will use and use and use and use and use that. Well, I'm just a woman. I'm not all women. I can't represent all women to you. I'm a white woman. I'm a young white woman. I'm
right,
like, you just start going down the line of all the
right.
things that make my experience unique to me.
Mhm,
I was in a meeting one time, all men except for me. The word miscarriage was used in the sermon. And we were all talking and someone brought up like, I don't know if that's the right word to use. Ericka, what do you think? Do you think miscarriage is a good or a bad word? And I was like, I don't, I mean, at this point in time, number one, they don't know what I've gone through in my life one way or another. So let's
yeah,
just put that on the table. What
right.
was true at that point in time for me was I had no kids. We had never tried to have kids. We had not experienced any of that. But everyone else in that room had multiple children. And so the odds were that those men in the room actually had more of an intimate experience with pregnancy loss and what that would have felt like as a parent, as a human
Mm,
being. And then from their wives' perspectives, whether that word was a helpful or harmful word for them. But because I had a uterus, all of a sudden now I'm supposed to be the expert in the room on this.
yeah.
And now, having become a mom and having gone through a pregnancy loss, I
Mm,
still think I would have been equally pained by that question for a whole nother set of
mhm,
reasons.
Mm.
yeah.
They weren't asking me that because I'm like, I had OBGYN history in my past or something like that,
Right.
and I had all this expertise about it. I did go to seminary, so I have a lot of knowledge when it comes to the Bible
Yeah.
and theological concepts. They
Right.
asked me that because I was a woman. And so, of course,
Mm,
of course, I should have something to say about this particular topic.
right.
And it's
Mm.
those things like that that just pile up and pile up and pile up, where now
Mhm,
instead of being here as like a theological equal, as a pastor, as a person, I'm being reduced down to your assumption of what a woman is, and that
mm,
has to do with my reproductive capacity.
right.
And yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's a hard thing to explain, but whenever that's your experience day in, day out with just all these people that you work with every day, and then strangers that you see in the church foyer, and then out and about, like it's a heavy burden sometimes. It can be really painful, and it's a lot to metabolize as a person.
Yeah. Oh man.
So I'm wondering, so it seems like, on paper, this church is egalitarian. They're excited to even hire your husband, and it seems like maybe things are going well until they're not. So what led you both out of the church? This
Well,
particular church, anyway.
yeah, I think really it was a combination of things, and to frame it in its most positive light, here's what I would say. As I completed my seminary education, that was one of the final steps for me where I really stopped being afraid to want the thing that I was afraid to always want, which was lead pastoral ministry. But even though early on I had gotten God's yes, I still had all of that cultural and social baggage that was telling me, yeah, you can teach and yeah, you can do this stuff, but don't think that you're ever going to be a senior pastor. Like, don't, or maybe eventually when you're like 60 years old. I'd only ever seen women pastors who were in their 50s or 60s. I'd seen tons of young 20 something male pastors.
Right.
They're everywhere. They're the youth leader pipeline to senior pastoral leadership.
Yeah.
And I'd seen tons and tons of young guys either already pastoring churches or in the pipeline to pastor churches. And here I was in my mid-20s thinking, yeah, that's not going to be a path that's open for me. So what is attainable? And I am someone who has a pretty bold personality. So the fact that the nature versus nurture had dampened that to the point where I was even afraid to even express that I felt a call to lead pastoral ministry. That was who I was coming into this role. And through some really great coaching and spiritual direction and personal growth and humbling and all the stuff that I went through during this time in the desert, it was a very desert-like experience for me in every way. I had this realization, like, I'm called to be a senior pastor. I'm gifted as a lead pastoral person. I have vision for the kind of church that I want to help to nurture and care for. And I want that. And it was an act of bravery for me to even say that to myself, let alone to actually start voicing that. And it was clear that in that setting, I was never going to be someone that was tapped to be the heir apparent of that congregation. And it just really came to me. There are a lot of other layers to it. But when I knew that it was time to move on from that ministry assignment was when I knew this is who God is calling me to be, and it's not possible here. And that must mean that I'm not supposed to be here. And I'm someone that is a fan of leaving early, in the sense that not waiting until things just get so bad and so brutal and so worn out and so exhausted that you are burning bridges when you're exiting an assignment or a role. As soon as I knew that was clear, I probably had a conversation with my supervisor within a couple weeks, like, hey, here's what God's doing, and here's where I think this is going to go. And it really came down to obedience for me, because once I knew with clarity that God was calling me to that, and it was something that even if it was painful and it took a while to get there, I was willing to go after it, then I couldn't stay where I was, because it wasn't possible for me to be obedient to God where I was.
Yeah. So Ericka, let's fast forward a little bit here. So you left that ministry, you started pursuing the calling of God on your life, and I'm sure there's so much story in there, but for the sake of time, we're going to compress some things here. You are a pastor now, planting with the Brethren in Christ denomination, an egalitarian denomination, as that other church was where you had your previous experience, officially egalitarian. I know that the denomination itself is taking some steps to try to credential more women in the denomination, to raise the level of the voice and influence of women in the denomination. And so I won't, I suppose, get into, your whole experience with the denomination as a whole. We are unofficially a BIC podcast. We're not official, so you can say whatever you want.
We won't get in trouble.
Yeah, you won't lose your sponsorship. We don't have sponsorship on this podcast. But my question really is directed to a little bit of some of the experience that you just came off of a few days ago. So was this it was a cohort surrounding this subject? Was this a Brethren in Christ cohort? Or was this something that you put together? Can you tell us a little bit about this experience you just came out of?
Yeah, so it's like BIC adjacent. So
Okay.
part of the Atlantic Conference, and as a church planter, one of the really great resources that our conference provides is we have a connection to an organization that's called Forge America.
Yes.
Yeah,
Alan Hirsch, right?
Alan Hirsch, Michael Frost, and their wives were the founders of Forge, and then they started Forge America. And so it's an organization, it's a network that's all about like equipping people to be missional and to have like a movemental missional approach to doing and being the church.
Yeah.
And so a lot of my vision from the imagination for the Holy District came from reading these missiologists while I was in that prior church setting, and just like running up against all these walls and imagine like, oh, it could be so much better. It could, this isn't working. What could work? And that's totally how God has wired me. And so I met one of the leaders of the Forge America national team when I was at a church planters retreat. Ryan, you were actually there, Terry Ishii.
Yes. Yeah.
And we connected, we hit it off. We had some really great conversation. And then he kind of started inviting me into some opportunities to get more involved with Forge America itself. And so recently I've joined the national team as the content director. And one of the main things that he really wanted to collaborate on was they're recognizing as an organization, though they have a pro-women theology and framework, their organization doesn't represent that. And so I was having a conversation like this with Terry over Zoom like 6 months ago. And he said, we want to find more apostolic female leaders like you, but I don't know how to do it. And I don't feel like I'm the right person to do it because I'm a dude. And so what would it look like to partner on this? And so we just started brainstorming, and I'm like, hey, if you want to get apostolic women together, you need to give them a job to do, because we just don't want to sit around and sing Kumbaya. Like, we want to knock something down, build something up, make something up. Like, we need a task that feels worthy. And so we started thinking, like, what if our task is to find a way to really flood the Forge America leadership pipeline with women who are gifted leaders, who are already doing amazing things. So how can we start equipping ourselves to identify those women? How do we equip ourselves to identify women who are underappreciated or overlooked because their leadership doesn't look like typical male leadership? And then how do we activate that leadership within them? Because we know that it's there. They're created in God's image, but they've got a lot of social conditioning that they're contending with. They've got a lot of environmental obstacles that they're contending with. So let's start building a group of people who are awake to this and who are passionate about doing something about it. And so that's where this, it's called Mobilizing Female Leaders. So it's kind of like a multi-phase initiative that we started with a 5-week cohort that I led, where we just started digging into the practices and postures that women and men can take if they want to become the kind of leaders and create the kind of spaces where women and men alike can both thrive and flourish. So that's what we just wrapped up and what we've been working on for the last few weeks.
Ericka, that's so cool. I'd like to get into some of those stances and postures in just a second if we can, but something you said struck me. So you're talking with Terry Ishii, and he's like, theologically, we've got this framework that women are empowered and called, but we're not doing this well. Can you help us? You kind of encountered a similar response when you were talking with that previous church. They were egalitarian in their theology officially, but we've got room to grow. We've got work to do in that area. What was the difference that you see between that church and this organization that you've now partnered with Forge? What's the difference in posture that you see there? Even though both responses sound kind of similar in the words that they're using, yes, we believe this, but we're not doing it well. What's the difference that you see?
You know, to really just be fair, on the surface, you don't really know as a woman if there really is going to be a difference, because people can really say a lot of things that sound right, but then it really comes down to what people actually do. And that's true just across the board.
Sure.
Actions speak louder than words.
Sure.
And so there's always a risk that a marginalized group takes whenever they agree to work with an organization or a company, or to come on staff with somewhere that says, we're not yet where we want to be, but we hope that you could help us do that. So I just want to name that, because that's a legitimate thing that I contend with all the time. Like, how do I know that this isn't going to be the same exact thing that I've experienced here? I had that conversation with Bishop Brian multiple times during my onboarding process. Yeah. And so what I would say the difference is that I've grown in wisdom. I've learned to ask different kinds of questions, and I've become a little bit more candid in the way that I engage in those kinds of conversations. And so for Terry, one thing that I noticed in our conversation is he was already understanding that I'm a man. I want this thing to happen, but I can't just go do it like by myself. And he wasn't asking me to help him accomplish a vision that he already had. He was saying, I do have this preferred future that has women actually, where we do what we say, like where women are represented in the way that they should be, but I don't know how to get there. And I think you might be someone who does. And can we talk about that? So there's a humility there. There's an self-awareness there. And to be asked to lead is a different thing than to be asked to help or to carry out. And I think a lot of times people think that they're empowering women by asking them to like just carry out something that's already been planned and determined for them. Well, we will help. We'll definitely help. It's great to help. That's a great thing to do. But you're not going to see someone's leadership capability if all you ever do is ask them to help. People show you that they can lead by getting opportunities to lead. And so the fact that he asked me to come in as a leader gave me a different set of expectation to say, okay, well, if you're asking me to lead, very early, you could ask Terry. I was like, here's something that I see problematic about what you just said. Or he was like, I want to platform women. And I said, hold on a second. You're moving too fast, because the goal is not just to platform women who have already discerned and like made their way through the muck and are representing the things that you want to be represented. There are thousands of women out there that no one is paying attention to, that no one has tapped, that no one is discipling, that no one is saying, I see this in you. And so if we just skip to platforming, we're going to gloss over all of these images of God who have all of these gifts in them that have been pushed down and, splotched out, or they're just they've taken other places to the, a business sector or the nonprofit world, because that's where they can actually do stuff without getting beat up all the time. And do we just want to platform people who have gotten bloody and decided to stay, or do we want to make it possible for women to not have to get bloody to give their gifts to the church? Yeah. And so I was able to have those kinds of conversations with him, and he didn't, immediately hate me. And so that
Ericka, that is such good stuff. That's such good stuff. So for the sake of time, I would like to, can we just hit really quick some of those postures and some of those things that you were talking about at the cohort, and then I'd like to end with one other question if Scott doesn't have anything else here. But can you hit us with some of that stuff from your cohort?
Yeah, I can give us a real high view. And just for future reference, some feedback we got wrapping up the cohort is that people definitely want to do it again, and there are people in their networks that are interested in participating. So if that's something that anyone in your audience would like to participate in the new year, we'll probably be running another one or two of these at least. Oh, super cool. It's for men and women. This isn't women getting together trying to solve a problem that we didn't create. This is women being willing to get in it and be honest and be vulnerable alongside men to learn how to activate our own leadership and identify and activate leadership in other women with brothers who are like, yeah, I actually want to do this too. I don't want to just talk about it and say I believe in it. I want to do it.
Yeah.
So there's more opportunities for that to come, and other things that will come if you guys want to be looped into that. But I think I'll just kind of hit on 2 or 3 of the practices that I think are really important. One of the practices that I talk about in this cohort is permission giving. And there are some, you guys might have come across this research about like team dynamics where there's a 5-to-1 ratio of like positive affirmation to critique. So for every like 1 critique that you give someone on your team, they need 5 affirmations in order to kind of be balanced out.
I've heard even up to like 10.
Okay, so let's
the negative stuff you hear is just so outsized. Yeah.
Outsized, right? So then what I encourage people to do is then think about all of the no's that women who are pursuing a leadership pathway in ministry will get and have gotten in their lives up to this point. And if 1 no, they needed 5 to 10 yeses to counteract just to get back to neutral.
Yeah.
Think about the women in your life who are dynamic, awesome, gifted, or whatever, quiet, but intuitive and thoughtful and just tuned into Holy Spirit, like whatever those characteristics of leadership that are needed. They have probably been told more times than you can count from the time that they were small and like explicitly, implicitly. So anyone who wants to affirm women in ministry, I want you all to just make yourself like the biggest permission giver person ever to walk this planet. And when you see women who you see leadership gifts in, or any kind of gift that you can affirm because they're there, say things to them like, did you know that you could really do blah, blah, blah? Wow, you communicated that so clearly and passionately. Did you know that you could probably deliver a sermon like really well? Have you ever thought about that? And like, you can't overdo it. You really can't overdo it because there's so much deficit in a lot of the women's bank accounts when it comes to affirmation of their call, that you can't overdo the permission giving. And you can look at research. Women are conditioned to feel a need for permission in a way that a lot of men are not. And some of the men shared in our cohort about how they never had to ask for permission because people came to them and said, would you like to do this? When they were 10, when they were 15, when they were 19. And that's just not the experience for a lot of women, girls growing up. I just talked to a person the other day who's on his own journey was complementarian. He doesn't really know what he is right now, but he's got daughters. And a couple weeks ago, his 7-year-old daughter said to him, Dad, I want to be a pastor when I grow up. And our hearts smile, right? You guys both just had a physical reaction to that. But immediately his wife said, oh, honey, we don't believe in that. That's not something that you can do. So she's 7. She made her first acknowledgement that she feels called to be a pastor. And she already got her first no from someone who loves her and cares for her and would probably die for her.
Yeah.
And, think about that, with the ramifications of that. To her credit, she said, well, that's stupid. And I'm like, she's going to be okay.
She'll be fine.
There you go.
Wow.
So permission giving. Like, I think I hit on that one because I just think it's probably really, it's not something you would think of automatically, but I think it's really important.
Yeah, it's great.
go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, I was just, as you were talking, it made me think, this must be why I've run across instances where I'm able to explain why I landed in the egalitarian camp to others, some of which are women who grew up in a complementarian camp. And despite all the biblical evidence, it's, for whatever reason, it's not always like a light switch that just flips, there's so many no's there that almost overcome and blind you to like, well, right here it is in scripture, and it's like, well, wait a minute. I'm thinking, just from hearing you talking, that it must be one of the reasons or the main reason why.
it's internalized, from the time. And if you're not someone that is taught to think critically about that from the get-go, we receive our faith. I mean, it's something that's so beautiful about our faith, but it's also something that's very challenging because I was a 9-year-old receiving a faith that I didn't know how to think critically about yet. And our faith is rich and complex and deep and mysterious and nuanced and beautiful and transhistorical and transnational. Like there's so much to engage, but we receive it and internalize that. And so from the time that you're small and the little boys are being told you could be a pastor, and who knows if they should be a pastor. I've met a lot of guys who shouldn't have been pastors. But they were told that they could and should be a pastor because that was something that was aspirational in their community. And you have little girls who are like memorizing all the books of the Bible and starting Bible studies, and they're being told you should marry a pastor. And just flip that, if little boys grew up from the time that they were small being told these are all the things that you can't do, or wouldn't it be great someday if you married like a really awesome pastor, and in your mind it's a woman and it's not a man, and like it's just, that's a fun thought experiment. Flip it.
Oh man.
Look at your church and then flip it. Imagine that all the men are actually women and all the women are actually men doing the same jobs, doing the same roles, having the same influence, and like how does that feel to you? And if it feels lopsided, then there's some opportunity to make some changes.
Yeah. Oh man, so good. So permission giving, that's a great one. What else you got?
The other one I think I would hit on is something I call positioning. And this is about preparing people and context for missional and relational success. So what can happen, and we hit on this earlier, is that people are like, I love women, I want them to be in ministry. Maybe listen to this podcast and like, that's it. I'm grabbing the nearest woman and she's preaching next Sunday or whatever. I doubt that's going to happen. But sometimes what can happen is people don't realize that they haven't thought through and prepared the context so that it will be a healthy space for women to be able to thrive. Now, I say this, women don't need like a pink Bible and a pink pulpit and a pink, whatever. That's not what it is. Women need all the same things that men need in order to thrive and to have a healthy leadership experience. But the hard part is that a lot of our structures were built by men and not intentionally, but it ends up de facto being for men. And so whenever, for example, some churches like the church I attended followed the Billy Graham rule, which meant that a married man and a married woman could not be alone together. Well, whenever all of your leadership are men, and I'm a female leader, that's one of, one woman and several men, I don't get to be in a mentor relationship with any of the people who are in leadership in my church because of the Billy Graham rule. That's a dangerous thing.
Right.
So how do women get mentored by leaders when they have gifts, when all the leaders are men and they're not allowed to be together alone with those men? And it's not that you like all mentorship happens in a one-on-one alone setting, but a lot of it does. I mean, think back in your life to all of the times that you've just hung out with a young guy or hung out with an older guy and it was just you two and it was in an office, or you went for a drive together, or you went whatever it might be. None of those things are on the table for women whenever you have those kind of dynamics in place. And so that doesn't prepare context for success. Or the pastor is egalitarian, but a lot of the people in the congregation are not, or they just are ambivalent. But the cultural tide in our Christian circles will default them to being leery of women in leadership. So if that's the situation and you bring a woman and you have her preach, the likelihood is that she is going to definitely have a really hard time. Even if she preaches the most amazing sermon, afterwards, she's going to get really unfortunate feedback or no feedback, or she's going to have, 2 Timothy man come and talk to her. She's going to have, people tell her she did pretty good for a woman. She's going to have people just engage her in a way that for a young leader that's doing that really courageous work of being bad at something until you can really get good at it, which we all have to do. Even when we're gifted, like we go through that rookie time and that naive space where we're so our awareness is so high and our competence just drops. And a lot of people had opportunity, a lot of men had opportunities to do that as teenagers and student ministry. And what happens sometimes is we take women who never were invested in at all in these kinds of ways intentionally. We're like, well, she's a good communicator. She does this in her job. Let's have her preach a sermon. And we just throw her up on the stage. And now she doesn't have nothing prepared her or the people who are going to be receiving her to experience that in a gracious way. Mm-hmm. And so, like I said, even if she knocks it out of the park, people are going to feel shocked and they're going to feel upside down. They're not going to know what to do about it. And then she's going to be kind of thrown into the deep end on that. Mm-hmm. Or if you only bring one woman into a leadership scenario, that is going to create a situation where tokenism is easier, and we can do the thing where now this woman represents all women. And it also creates a sense of forced competition, because if leadership is a zero-sum game, it's a pie. And 7 pieces go to men and 1 piece goes to women, then all of the women who have gifts are going to know implicitly there's only 1 piece of pie. So I have to be the most gifted woman if I want to be able to give my gifts to the church.
Yeah.
I have to compete with other women in order to give my gifts to the church. And this is not done on purpose. A lot of times people are thinking, oh, we're making a step. We're going to let a woman do something here. And the message that sends to all the women there is there's only room for 1 woman to do something here. So why not 2? You got 10 guys doing it. Why can't you have 3 or 4 women? Goodness gracious.
Right. Yeah.
But it will cost, because when you actually start doing this kind of positioning things well, then it will actually significantly change your organization. And the last thing I would say is you got to talk about it. You got to teach about it before you throw women into the lion's den. What's the marketing thing? People have to hear something 7 times before they actually start like remembering it and internalizing it. So if you haven't like actually done like some good solid teaching on theology of like how Jesus loves women and women being called and women being, invited into all aspects of leadership, if you haven't done that 7 times, your church doesn't get it. They don't think about it. They don't get it. And when they're confronted with it unprepared, they're not going to be their best selves. They're going to be off kilter. And so positioning is all about helping set people up to be able to be their best selves, and not to say and behave in ways that come from shock and discomfort, but to help them actually show up intentional, feeling prepared and ready to engage from a less anxious space. Those are things I think would really go a long way to helping support women as they're following Jesus and trying to be obedient to their call.
Yeah. Man, those are so good. So permission giving, positioning, and then talk about it, teach about it before you take some of the more public steps or aspects of doing it. That's such good stuff. Ericka, thanks so much for coming and sharing your time with us. Just before we leave and give some final contact information and stuff like that, what would you tell, Ericka? What would you tell a woman who is struggling or wrestling, maybe that's a better word, wrestling with their call to ministry, who may not be in a setting, a context where that would be encouraged? What would you say to that woman, young woman, or an older woman who is feeling that, call to ministry, but is in a setting where it may not be as encouraged or supported?
Especially one that has gotten a lot of no's. I was thinking the same thing, Ryan. Thank you for asking that.
Yeah.
I've got 3 things. These are my pretty standard 3 things that I say to women all the time. The first one is, you are going to be a fish swimming upstream no matter where you are. So find some other fish that will swim with you. You don't need a lot. You don't need a bunch. You just need a few people that get you, support you, are in your corner, and that you can be honest with and share with, that will swim with you upstream, because that's absolutely what you're doing. I will be a fish. If you are a woman and you're feeling this way and you're listening right now, call me. I'm a fish. I will swim with you. So you definitely need some folks just around you, men, women, whatever. I don't care, but you need people around you. The second thing that I would say is, spend the least amount of time trying to prove yourself that you possibly can. You're gonna do it. I know you're gonna do it. We all do it to some extent. there's going to be this part of you that feels like if they just saw how gifted I was at this, or if they could just experience, or if they just knew, and if I could just, when I do this, then they'll notice. And when I do this, they'll see. It's okay. It's a part of you even proving to yourself that you're capable and that you're gifted and overcoming the no's that you have. But just do it the least amount that you possibly can. And, hear Jesus' words saying to you, behold, my beloved daughter in whom I'm well pleased. You don't have to prove yourself to anyone. You're a child of God. And so do the least amount of that as you possibly can. It's important time. It's precious time. And then the third thing that I would say is go where they're ready for you. The kingdom of God is breaking in everywhere, baby. You don't have to be the savior of this particular church. You don't have to be a martyr. You don't need to rescue people that don't want to be rescued. The kingdom of God is ready for you. And there are communities that are ready for you, or there are communities that need you. They need you. They need you to bring your whole self to the table. And so go where they're ready for you. If they're not ready for you where you are, that's okay. They're not ready. It doesn't mean they're bad. It doesn't mean they don't love Jesus. It doesn't mean they don't love you. It just means they're not ready. But there are places, I promise you, that will be ready for you. Because if God's calling you, then that means God's ready for you. And if God's ready for you, then God's prepared a place for you, and he's prepared a way for you. And that's what I would say to you. And that is what I say to myself all the time.
Oh, man. Yay! I feel like I want to applaud that, Ericka. Such good stuff. Scott, do you have anything else, my man?
No, thank you so much, Ericka. I really appreciate all your words and insights. And I imagine this conversation will be valuable to many, many listeners.
I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah. If we ever get many, many listeners.
Well, there's that, but we'll get there.
Oh gosh.
Even for one.
That's
this
right.
is really worth to talk about for me, for sure.
Man. Yeah. Well, cool. So if you have any questions, if you're listening to this, you want to reach out to us, that's biclifepodcast@gmail.com. Again, biclifepodcast@gmail.com. You can reach out to us with questions you may have, concerns, things that you would want to see us address on this topic or any other topic. Or if you just want to see more information on how to get in touch with Ericka, we can help you do that. Ericka, how can people reach out to you?
Yeah, so if you guys go to our website, holydistrict.org, there's contact information there. You can submit a contact form. My email address is Ericka, ERICKA, @holydistrict.org. So I would love to get an email from you there. And then, like I said earlier, we're on Facebook and Instagram @Rediscover Sacred. You can follow us there, like us, whatever, and send us a message. And I would be the one that would be responding most of the time. So would be more than happy to connect. Guys and gals, this is not a woman's problem. Like, this is actually the church's problem.
Yeah.
We're only going to solve it together. Women being courageous and fully themselves, and men being willing to pay the cost to follow Jesus and to love their sisters right back into the place that they've always supposed to be in. This isn't a new idea. This is the oldest idea for the church. This is how the church started. So, this isn't just me saying, I support you women. I support you men and women who are ready to work on this, because it's meaningful and we can do it.
Oh man, so good. Ericka, thanks so much. Scott, thanks again, man, for joining me. And thank you, everyone, for listening, watching, however you're checking out this podcast today. Thank you so much for joining us. And we look forward to being with you guys again for our next episode. We look forward to continuing this conversation and learning right alongside each and every one of you. Again, Ericka, thanks so much. We'll catch you all in the next one. See ya.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to the BIC Life Podcast. Brethren in Christ churches exist to follow Jesus, serve others, and make disciples. If you're looking for more information about the BIC denomination, or if you're looking for one of our local churches, head over to bicus.org. And if you'd like to get in touch with us at the podcast, you can do so by emailing us at biclifepodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.